Hi, this is Catherine Moore, and I am back to talk about the policies with the Texas Annual Conference. And I also am going to share a little bit about my history with the Texas Annual Conference. And let me bring that up. Okay. My name is Catherine Moore, and I am a survivor of sexual assault within the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist denomination. This is not just my story, it is a story about what happens when the systems that are supposed to protect us fail us. And today I'm sharing this because silence protects the institution. And the institution that I am referring to is the Texas Annual Conference Administration within the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas. But truth protects the vulnerable. And that is why I am speaking today. I am willing to be vulnerable with what I have been through. The system we're told to trust. For decades, the Texas Annual Conference has publicly claimed to have strong policies for clergy conduct, supervision, and ethical accountability. Their own documents, like those found in conference handbooks, promise things like ethical leadership, safe environments, pastoral responsibility, and mandatory reporting of misconduct, especially involving minors or vulnerable people. And I would also like to add to this, they also like to talk about prevenient grace, meaning you are loved before you are created. On paper, it all looks good. On paper, it all looks protective. On paper, it looks like there are procedures to prevent abuse until it happens. But policies mean nothing when they're not followed. Excuse me. And in the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas, the policies were not followed. They still aren't. Not for me, not for others, not for decades. The policies are nothing more than ink on paper. What happened to me? My assault was an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a long history of clergy taking advantage of their authority and a conference failing to act. When I finally came forward as an adult, I hired an attorney. In 2017, he contacted the bishop of the Texas Annual Conference to notify them that I was filing a claim for injuries I suffered as a result of sexual assault by an employee of the United Methodist denomination. That was supposed to trigger a process, a response, an investigation, a pastoral concern for a survivor. But instead, it triggered silence, stalling, insurance loops, and avoidance. The letter my attorney received said there was no coverage for years because the abuse happened before their insurance policy took effect. How convenient. To them, the problem wasn't the abuse, it was the paperwork. The trauma I lived through, the years I lost, became a question of liability instead of responsibility. So I was expected to just pull myself up by my bootstraps, which I did. And now that I'm talking about this and embarrassing the hell out of the Texas Annual Conference, since they are a multi-billion-dollar administration, I'm sure that they can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, can't they? This is what happens when an institution's priority is protecting itself instead of protecting the children once under its care. I'm going to read page 13 and 14 in the Residency Program Handbook of 2023 for candidates preparing for ordination in the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas. And this is where I left off on 12B. A summary of these sermons and teaching reviews will be shared with the Residency Effectiveness team at the second meeting. After you select your lay consultation team, plan a date for the first meeting. Copy the pages of this book from page 20 on. That includes the LCT handbook, the KSAP, and the working definition of clergy effectiveness. You will need to give this to every member of your lay consultation team. At the first meeting, you will watch the training video together, set the meeting schedule for the rest of the year, get to know each other, and pray. Residency Effectiveness Team. The Residency Effectiveness Team, or RET, is part of the Board of Ordained Ministry and will meet with you at least twice during your residency program. The Residency Effectiveness Team includes 1, a chair from the Board of Ordained Ministry, 2 other Board of Ordained Ministry reps. 1 can be non-Board of Ordained Ministry clergy of orders if needed. 3, a representative from the lay consultation team. 4, a district superintendent. These are all assigned. You don't need to do anything except name 1 member of your lay consultation team, usually the chair, to be the representative of the Resident Effectiveness Team. The Resident Effectiveness Team will make an on-site visit in the fall of the first year of residency and the spring of the second year. The second year will include review of the disciplinary questions in preparation for the Board of Ordained Ministry interviews. First, on-site meeting. The purpose of the interview will determine any growth areas the provisional member needs to develop or improve upon during the course of the residency. The goal of the meeting is to produce a written growth plan that will personalize the final steps of the ordination process for each resident. Don't underestimate this step. Over the last several years, several requirements have been taken out of the residency process with the goal of making the process as individualized as possible. The growth plan is where that individualization occurs. The growth plan contains your personal requirements for the remainder of the ordination process. I was not alone. Other survivors experienced similar failures. Marla Tabb was one of those. Well, she didn't survive. Marla Tabb was murdered in the United Methodist Parsonage in Troop, Texas. Her life was taken by a United Methodist minister that was employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration. And that was Michael Tabb, who was sentenced to 55 years in prison. One of them one of the survivors, represented by the same attorney, was a young girl who lost her mother, lived with her grandmother, and trusted her pastor, Pastor Kendall Graham of the Texas Annual Conference within the United Methodist denomination in Houston, Texas. You see, clergy are employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration, and they are placed on assignment to lead the congregations of the churches that are under the Texas Annual Conference administration. The church appointed him to shepherd her. He used that appointment to groom Alicia Provost Whitfield, to isolate her, to abuse her from childhood to adulthood. He fathered a child with Alicia Provost Whitfield. He lied to congregations presenting her as a granddaughter. He officiated, preached. Let me correct myself. He lied to congregations presenting Alicia Provost Whitfield as his daughter and their child as their grandchild. He officiated, preached, traveled, counseled, all while living a double life. Letters were sent to the bishop, Bishop Huey. Warnings were given. The conference had a responsibility under its own policies to investigate misconduct, immediately report it, and remove the pastor from power. But the response, again, silence, delay, protection of the institution, not the victim. That's what happened to me. Policy says clergy must maintain boundaries. Policy says pastoral authority can never be used for personal or sexual gain. Policy says misconduct must be addressed swiftly. But it's quite the contrary. It's not addressed at all. But what is written does not matter when leaders choose not to act. The policy failure. The Texas Annual Conference had policies, but here's the truth. A policy that isn't enforced is not a policy. It is a decoration, a shield, a way to appear moral without acting morally. On pages 13 and 14 of their leadership materials, they outline the expectations for clergy ethics and accountability. I just read 13. They emphasize moral behavior. They emphasize safety. They emphasize following rules, of which they do not. Yet survivors like me get ignored. Children were left vulnerable. Pastors were allowed to continue in leadership, while victims were left with silence, shame, and lifelong trauma. Policies didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because the conference chose not to follow them. And what do you think that the Epstein files would have in common with an evangelical multi-billion-dollar administration such as the Texas Annual Conference within the United Methodist denomination? What would they have in common with the Epstein files? I'll tell you. What they have in common with the Epstein files is sexual misconduct and inappropriate sexual contact with minors. That's right. That is what the Texas Annual Conference has in common with the Epstein files. Bishop Cynthia Harvey is over the Texas Annual Conference. But I'm sure that Bishop Cynthia Harvey did not realize that what the Texas Annual Conference administration under the United Methodist denomination shares in common with the Epstein files is a history of adults getting involved in inappropriate relationships with minors, sexual or not. Pastors were allowed to continue in leadership while victims were left with silent shame and lifelong trauma. Policies didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because the conference chose not to follow them. Survivors need transparency. This is about what survivors need. Survivors need transparency. We need mandatory reporting that is actually enforced. We need bishops and conference leaders who prioritize people over liability. But instead, the survivor and the victim is considered the liability, not the predator. We need a system that doesn't treat us like a legal problem, but like human beings whose lives were reshaped by trauma. The church claims to be a place of healing, a place of accountability, a place where justice matters. But justice cannot happen if victims are ignored, dismissed, or pushed into silence. The conference needs to stop protecting abusers and start protecting its people. Closing. I am telling you my story today because it is time for the truth to matter. It is time for survivors to be heard. It is time for the Texas Annual Conference to confront the harm caused when policies are ignored and when people in power choose image over integrity. I am doing this out of hope. Hope that by exposing the failures, change can finally come. Hope that future children will be safe. Hope that healing can begin. Because silence protects the institution, but truth protects the vulnerable. And it's not just about facing the truth. It's also about facing the reality of how trauma has impacted my life. And if I am being silent, I am not facing that reality. I'm going to close with page 14 from the Residency Program Handbook for candidates preparing for ordination in the Texas Annual Conference. Because of that, it is essential that you come to the RET meeting prepared to discuss the growth plan. You should already be thinking about strengths you want to build on and weaknesses you want to address. The growth plan doesn't all need to be about your weakness. It can also help you build on strengths, address personal areas of health, etc. You may even want to work with your LCT, lay consultation team, to come up with a rough draft of a growth plan that the RET can build on. Whatever you put in your growth plan, make sure it is useful and feasible. Remember, this is going to be one of your requirements. Do not suggest that you should read an academic book a week for the next year. Make the suggestion things that will be useful to you and feasible to you for you to accomplish, and then do them. But keep this in mind with these policies. There cannot be a growth plan if policies are never implemented. And that statement just came from a college dropout. Unlike a clergy employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration, who has at a minimum of a master's degree. Whatever you put in your growth plan, make sure it is useful and feasible. Remember, this is going to be in your requirements. Do not suggest that you should read an academic book a week for the next year. Make the suggestions things that will be useful to you and feasible for you to accomplish, and then do them. Some things that may be considered for your growth plan are attending a Soderkist marriage retreat, working at district camp, Army or Texas Youth Academy, attending the events for your order, seeking out mentors for particular growth areas, exercising at least twice a week, attending trustees and finance meetings if an associate, to learn about church administration, attending a particular community event to get to know the community better, go on a date with your spouse once a week. And this is from me. This is what I would like to add to it. How about do not sexually abuse minors? Do not sexually harass women or anyone else in the churches of the Texas Annual Conference Administration within the United Methodist denomination. Second on-site meeting, primary goal is to evaluate effectiveness and review the disciplinary questions. The RET will also revisit your growth plan to determine if you have successfully completed it. The residency effectiveness team will make a recommendation to the Board of Ordained Ministry. By that time, they won't care if you follow the policies or not. Maximum 2-hour interview. The resident should not be involved in the first two sections, which are the reports from the LCT and the senior pastor. See second meeting form on page 18. And that's all I have for tonight.